Good morning. Happy Easter, everyone. Wonderful to see you here today. This is a great celebration. I also am mindful that there are so many people behind the scenes who do some really important work to let this happen. So I just wanted to lead off this morning by saying thanks to a few people. Thanks to Jimmy and the Family Ministries team for all the work they did yesterday. We had a really fun Easter egg hunt and time here out on the lawn. Louise Davis Memorial Service was yesterday, and I know a lot of work went into that, so all of you helped with that. Thank you. Thank you to our worship committee for preparing the sanctuary with these beautiful flowers for our worship today, and thank you, as always, to our choir for music that tunes our hearts to worship. Yes, amen. So our reading for this morning won't surprise you. It's the resurrection account from Luke's Gospel, Luke 24, verses 1 to 12. So listen for God's voice to you. Very early in the morning on the first day of the week, the women went to the tomb, bringing the fragrant spices they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus. They didn't know what to make of this. Suddenly, two men were standing beside them in gleaming bright clothing. The women were frightened and bowed their faces toward the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He isn't here, but has been raised. Remember what he told you while he was still in Galilee, that the human one must be handed over to sinners, be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words. When they returned from the tomb, they reported all these things to the 11 and all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told these things to the apostles. Their words struck the apostles as nonsense, and they didn't believe the women. But Peter ran to the tomb. When he bent over to look inside, he saw only the linen cloth. Then he returned home, wondering what had happened. This is the word of the Lord. I want to start out on this Easter morning with a question for you. What if Easter is basically about facing the future? What all this is about facing the future with hope. If there's something to that, then we might want to explore together what the future looks like, what it feels like for us right now. And there are lots of interesting ways to begin a conversation about the future. When I thought of some of these, we could talk about the use of drones in warfare and how that's changing things, or the effect of climate change on various habitats, or the upshot of robotic automation on the future of work, or we could talk about demographic changes that are affecting what it feels like just to live in our American culture. All those might be productive, but I think it would be more fun this morning to begin facing the future with hope by exploring punks and apes. Okay, take a look at this headline from the Business Insider. Okay, it'll be up on the screen. Quote, "Yuga Labs, the team behind Bored Ape Yacht Club, has acquired CryptoPunks and Meebits from Larva Labs." That's the headline. It's big news, okay? By a show of hands, how many of you feel like you sort of know, have some inkling what on earth this is referring to? Okay, a few, not very many. How many of you have no idea? This looks like gibberish or a foreign language, or I made this up. I did not make it up, I promise you. Okay. Here are some images of CryptoPunks on the screen. They are digital art. What do you think? Just at a first glance? Would you buy one? That's the real question. Would you buy one? Now, there are 10,000 of these CryptoPunk images, each of them with only slight variations, so they largely look the same. The cheapest one you could buy right now would cost you $181,000. But before you jump online with your credit card to try to purchase that cheapest of the 10,000 CryptoPunks, I do want you to know that you can't buy it with regular money. You need to get a crypto wallet. You need to acquire $181,000 worth of the cryptocurrency ETH. Then you can make the transaction, okay? So if you're still interested in buying a CryptoPunk, I do want you to know what you're getting. Now, you won't really own the image. I mean, anyone can possess the images. These are just JPEGs. They can download it and store it on their computer. In fact, if you decided to buy a CryptoPunk and use it as your profile picture on social media, as many people do, other people could just right-click on your profile picture and save it to their computer, and then they'd own it too. So why on earth would you buy it? Well, here's where it gets really complicated, and I'm out of my depths, okay? There's a digital ledger called the blockchain, and your purchase of your CryptoPunk would be recorded on that digital ledger, and everyone in the world could see that you purchased it, that you own it, and no one could ever change the ledger. Does that make sense? Okay, now who's buying? No? All right, maybe you're more of a Bored Ape Yacht Club kind of person. So next image. Here is an image of some of the Bored Apes. So basically, same idea. Like the CryptoPunks, the Bored Apes are called non-fungible tokens, or NFTs. So the Bored Apes and the CryptoPunks collections, they are iconic among early adopters, sort of NFT enthusiasts. The CryptoPunks were one of the earliest projects, but the Bored Apes Yacht Club has really come on strong in the past few months. So if these images look to you rather unimpressive, you're thinking, well, these look kind of like other digital art I've seen. I've like lots of other JPEG images that I can find all over the internet. Maybe some of you can even create digital images like this. These looks like nothing special. Well, maybe. Trading volume for the Bored Apes NFT has already exceeded $1 billion just in the last few months. Trading volume for the CryptoPunks, the earlier version, has already exceeded $2.2 billion. These are just the two sort of most prominent examples of this NFT digital art. If you take all the NFTs together, the trading volume for all of that exceeded $23 billion in 2021 alone. I promise I'm going to get to resurrection. Just hang in there, right? You're beginning to wonder what is going on. It's early. I realize you got here at 9:30. Now, there are critics of cryptocurrencies and these software innovations that underpin the making and selling of these NFTs. Some critics argue that there's not really much there, that this is nothing more than a sophisticated pyramid or Ponzi scheme. Enthusiasts, of course, investors, see things much differently. It's not uncommon for my wife and I to be walking the dog or driving the car when I will excitedly mention to her some breakthrough in cryptocurrency or blockchain technologies. My wife will say, "That sounds dumb." And honestly, I don't know which of us is right on this, but what interests me about all this cryptocurrency, NFT, digital art stuff as we gather here on Easter, though, is how often software developers and investors describe these innovations as the arrival of an unevenly distributed future. That brings me to the title of today's sermon and to the line that's attributed to sci-fi writer William Gibson. Here's the quote: "The future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed." Now, this line comes up in a 1990 documentary entitled Cyberpunk. Gibson said this line, and he also put it a little bit differently, but I think it's helpful to hear it. At another point in the interview, he says, quote, "The future has already happened." The basic idea is that the unusual things that a few people are doing now will become the normal things that everyone's doing in the future, right? So futurists and technologists, they love this line. Cheerleaders for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum use it as a way of characterizing early adopters of these new technologies that appear strange now. Only a few people are doing this, but will be widespread. All of us will be doing it in the future. But I want you to keep Gibson's idea, that line, in mind as we do our best to welcome the good news of resurrection into our lives on this Easter morning. That insight that the future has already begun to happen, boy, that sounds awful close to what the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15. This is what Paul writes, "But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead. He's the first crop of the harvest." Now, some of you may have grown up hearing this a little differently. He's the first fruits, right? He's the first crop of the harvest of those who have died. Each event will happen in the right order: Christ, the first crop of the harvest, then those who belong to Christ at his coming. The Christians who were living in the middle of the first century in Corinth had questions about the resurrection. So if you have them, don't feel bad, you're welcome here. Paul engages those questions with an agricultural image. But you don't have to be a farmer to relate to the image. Some planted crops come up earlier than others, even within a planted field, a single planted field. Some little green tendrils will pop up here and there, this corner or that corner, before the rest of the field grows. Paying attention to the early crop, the early growth, is a way of orienting yourself to the future, says Paul. One little sprout of early wheat here or there, of course, that's not going to feed many people, but you don't focus on the smallness of what you notice at first. You focus on the beginning of the more to come. You live in hope that the small signs of goodness you can see and experience now will become a field full of goodness in time to come. Now, let me come back to our scripture reading today from Luke's gospel, his account of the resurrection. I've been suggesting already that what makes this news good news for us is that it helps us face the future in a particular way. It helps us face the future with hope and energy. And I think the way Luke tells this story welcomes this kind of reading. So back up with me just for a minute, get a little momentum, because I want you to consider the way Luke moves into the resurrection story through the crucifixion story. On Luke's telling, the crucifixion isn't just something that happened back then to Jesus. It's instead a new way of seeing ourselves and the world around us. Reading the crucifixion story this way helps us pay attention to the way life so often feels dispiriting and stale. Crucifixion names a life that's only half awake. Yes, time keeps moving and history keeps happening, but not much new breaks open. That's crucifixion. Let me give you a couple examples of the way Luke tells the story. One example would be the way Luke involves Pilate and Herod in the account of Jesus' death. Both are political appointees of Rome, entrusted with keeping the peace and keeping the revenue flowing. Pilate's in charge in Jerusalem, Herod up north in Galilee, and these two political rivals end up passing Jesus back and forth in the early trial scene on Friday. Both of them afraid of any kind of rebellion or uprising. Neither of them bothered all that much by torturing and executing an innocent man if it happens to secure their political appointment for yet another term. And then I want you to notice the odd little detail that Luke includes at chapter 23, verse 12, and this will be on the screen. Pilate and Herod became friends with each other that day. Before this, they had been enemies. So what was it on that Friday, the day of Jesus' death, that brought these two bitter rivals together? They like how the world is. They want things to stay just the same. They can't see anything interesting about the newness of Jesus' way of life. They can't imagine a future much differently than the one currently on offer. Let me give you one more example from Luke's version of the crucifixion story. Jesus, sleep-deprived and weakened from torture, staggers out of Jerusalem towards the hill where he and other criminals will be publicly executed. And Luke includes the curious detail that on the way out of the city, Jesus turns to a group of women who are crying for him to say, quote, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't cry for me. Rather, cry for yourselves and for your children." Friends, we are those fellow travelers prone to feeling bad about what happened to Jesus. And yet, Jesus warns us that crucifixion isn't something that happens only to him. It's an ongoing dynamic, a force in the world. So yes, it's Easter and we can live with hope, but it will have to be an energetic hope that can face all kinds of challenges. Yes, we can live with joy, but it will need to be the kind of joy that can sustain heartache and setback along the way. Now turn more squarely to the good news of the resurrection. The women who came to the tomb to prepare Jesus' body for burial early on Sunday, they are models of care. They're also entrusted to be the first preachers of the good news. In Easter terms, they were the earliest of early adopters. Even so, they came to the tomb like you or I come to so much in our own lives, settling for another hopeless dead end. They come to the tomb too tired to hope for anything radically new, and that's when they heard the very same words that you've heard this morning from those bright visitors. He isn't here. He has been raised. The male disciples, famously fickle when things get hard and dangerous, fare no better on this score. When the women preach to them about the empty tomb, the men hear it as, quote, nonsense. Again, even those who knew Jesus well weren't quite ready for the future that came to birth on that morning. Now, I get it. A story about an empty tomb doesn't prove anything. It will leave some of us rather unmoved, either because we've heard this story too often or because we can't imagine why it would matter all that much, or maybe we know a few people who claim to live by this story and we're a little bit unimpressed by what we see, right? But there is one thing that this story does for some people sometimes. It can trigger your curiosity. It can awaken you to the possibilities in your own life. It can send you back to look one more time at your own experience. Peter, a hot mess of a human being if there ever was one. Peter runs to the tomb with excitement, and he, in that running, embodies at least one interesting possibility for us, and the possibility is not so much that we buy it all, believe it all immediately. It's more like running with excitement back to our own lives to see what things look like in this new light. Easter isn't a time for arguing about evidence or proving that this or that happened. It's a time for softness, for opening. I think many of us here are in a kind, I'll call it a pastel mood. We might not be confident that anything like the resurrection of a crucified Jesus happened, but we're doing our best to stay open. Even staying open is hard because we assume that we know what's real and we know how the world works. Fiber optic cables are real. Electricity is real. Banks and commerce are real. Buildings and landscape are real. At best, we're kind of here in a posture today that says, well, I'm not going to renegotiate all the big picture. I'm pretty sure about all that, but maybe I'm open to some modest tinkering, some decorating around the edges of my reality map. So friends, here's the good news today. The future that you're facing, the future belongs to Jesus' way of life. The future belongs to children. It belongs to the poor, to the queer, to the incarcerated and the unemployed. It belongs to those living with disabilities. It belongs to those in pain and those addicted. It belongs to those without safety nets, without savings accounts, and without insurance, to refugees and orphans and widows, to the left out, to the left behind, and the overlooked. And friends, if you didn't find yourself on that list, you might want to let God's Spirit pull you into this wonderful Easter space of being a friend, an ally, or a co-conspirator with those who are. I'm not saying anything new. It was Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount who said that the meek, and not the successful or the attractive, the meek will inherit the earth. Of course, you don't have to buy this, but if you do buy it, the next step would be to cultivate new habits of noticing and valuing little signs of goodness. You'll have to give up waiting around for the obvious and the spectacular so that you don't miss the smaller size wonders that happen every single day right under your nose. This is really short, but take a look at this video from the actor Morgan Freeman.
I am not Morgan Freeman, and what you see is not real. Well, at least in contemporary terms, it is not. What if I were to tell you that I am not even a human being? Would you believe me? What is your perception of reality? Is it the ability to capture, process, and make sense of the information our senses receive? If you can see, hear, taste, or smell something, does that make it real? Or is it simply the ability to feel? I would like to welcome you to the era of synthetic reality. Now, what do you see?
So that was not Morgan Freeman. That was just a computer animation. That was a deep fake video of Morgan Freeman. He said none of that. So video technology and computer graphics have advanced in recent years, driven mostly by the movie industry. If you're making movies, it's helpful to be able to put an actor's real face on a stunt double's body. That's how this technology got generated. But now these technical capabilities are making it possible to produce fairly convincing deep fakes. They're not perfect, but they're getting better. There are Tom Cruise deepfakes, Barack Obama deepfakes. It's now possible to take misinformation campaigns a step further by creating persuasive, compelling video of persons saying or doing things they didn't say or do. So if this futuristic technology is used to make movies that entertain us, great, I guess. If it's used to steal an election or to frame me for a crime I didn't commit, not so great, maybe, right? So facing the future isn't so much about passively waiting around for technology to improve our lives. Deep fake video is but one of lots of different examples of a future that might in fact be horrifying. As one other example, all the different virtual worlds we're creating, from video games to other metaverses, they might be entertaining, educational, and might even connect us to one another in interesting ways in the future. But even if these virtual worlds become completely immersive and entertaining and compelling, we still might want to ask why we're devoting so much significant capital to building virtual worlds when there are so many face-to-face in real-life places that are hellish and harmful. Fun fact, I'm getting ready to end. Fun fact, this is free today. It's Easter. Online rumors are suggesting that Facebook plans to take a nearly 50% cut of all revenue generated in Facebook's metaverse, in their dystopian version of a metaverse. So if you plan to join a metaverse, please find one slightly less villainous than Mark Zuckerberg's. That's my only ask. Facing the future that begins with Jesus' resurrection is about collaborating with friends and neighbors on futures that align, that resonate with Jesus' way of life. I haven't been around Second very long, but I've been here long enough to know that Second Presbyterian isn't a community built to sit around and worry about negative outcomes. It's a base camp for mission and ministry. We gather for worship as people who are going back out to live with joyful energy that bends the world in new directions. To move from worry and despair into joyful and generous hope isn't really about conversion to a new set of teachings or beliefs. It's a conversion to a more deeply satisfying life, a more rewarding way of living with others and living in our neighborhood and our city. It reconnects us to our hopes for ourselves, our families, our friends, and our neighbors. You don't have to be Christian or even be connected to a church to be part of this joyful movement, but it's one way to do it that many of us have found helpful and rewarding, satisfying. So I'm glad that you're here. Happy Easter. And I'm glad that you've cracked the door a little bit. I'm glad if anyone here feels a sort of inarticulate desire to welcome a richer, more complex view of reality and to live a good life within it. The resurrection story isn't really interested in arguing with you much. It's just brutally here as a story. It doesn't flinch. It sees itself as a breathtakingly generous offer for us to connect to something real. Resurrection is the name we have for the real world, for the future of the real world. Resurrection is the name we have for a life lived with joy. And if you want, you can trade in everything you have for this pearl of great price. You can align your energies with all the little tendrils of goodness in the world. Who knows? You might even be one yourself. Amen.